What if nothing truly matters? The truth about nihilism, what if nothing truly matters? It sounds like the start of a teenage crisis or a late-night existential meltdown. But I want you to sit with that question, really sit with it. Not as a cry for help, not as a punchline, but as a serious philosophical possibility. What if everything you've ever done, everything you've ever feared, loved, built, or lost ultimately meant nothing? What if there's no cosmic scoreboard, no grand narrative, no final judgment, no redemption arc, no karmic balance? Just atoms colliding, time passing, and then silence. If that thought terrifies you, I want you to know you're not alone. That reaction is the precise reason why nihilism, the belief that life lacks inherent meaning or value, feels like a dark and dangerous idea. We're not wired to believe that nothing matters. We're wired to need things to matter. Meaning is the software that runs our hardware. It gets us out of bed, fuels our goals, gives our pain a purpose and our joy a shape. Without it, we feel like we're floating in an infinite void, screaming into a cosmos that never answers back. But here's the twist. What if nihilism isn't the enemy? What if it's the beginning of something deeper? What if asking whether anything matters is the first step toward living more honestly, more freely, and more fully? Let's break this down. Nihilism isn't a belief system, it's more like a confrontation. It's the moment you realize that the stories you were told growing up about who you are, what success means, what's right and wrong, what happens after death might not be true, or at least not universally true. It's the moment you realize that the universe doesn't owe you meaning, that maybe, just maybe, you have to create it yourself. And that realization, it's terrifying, because most of us have lived our entire lives inside borrowed meaning.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Think about it. How many of your values are actually yours? How many of your beliefs did you choose versus inherit? Your religion, your definition of success, your idea of love, even your sense of self, how much of that was built by you and how much was built for you? Nihilism is like a philosophical earthquake. It shakes the foundations. It dares to ask, if we took everything away, your job, your relationships, your identity, what would you be left with? Would there be anything left at all? It's a brutal question, but it's also liberating. Because when you realize that nothing has meaning unless you give it meaning, you regain power. You stop running on autopilot. You stop chasing goals you never chose. You stop performing for an audience that was never watching. And you start asking real, dangerous questions. Questions like, what do I value? What kind of life do I want to live? What kind of person do I want to become if no one gets to clap? But here's where it gets tricky. Most people, when they encounter nihilism, try to escape it. They panic. They reach for distractions, money, pleasure, work, spirituality, anything to avoid sitting in the void. But the void isn't the enemy. The void is the mirror. It shows you what's really driving you. Are you kind because you believe in kindness, or because you want to be seen as kind? Are you ambitious because you love the craft, or because you're afraid of being insignificant? Are you spiritual because you feel connected to something higher, or because you're terrified of death? Nihilism doesn't answer those questions, but it forces you to ask them, and that's its gift. It tears down illusions so you can begin again, clean, raw, real, but only if you're brave enough to stay with it. Now let's talk about fear. Because the fear of nothingness is what drives most of our behavior. We pretend we're afraid of failure, humiliation, rejection. But underneath all of that is the fear that none of it matters, that we'll climb the mountain only to find the summit is empty. And that fear paralyzes us. Or worse, it drives us to build lives that look meaningful from the outside but feel hollow on the inside. So here's the challenge. What happens if we stop running from that fear? What happens if we accept for a moment that nothing truly matters, at least not in the cosmic objective sense? What happens if we stop asking the universe to hand us meaning and instead start building it moment by moment, brick by brick, breath by breath? Because here's the secret most people never realize. If nothing matters inherently, then everything can matter subjectively. Meaning becomes a choice, not a command. You get to choose what matters to you, not because it will echo through eternity, but because it lights something up inside you right now. That kind of meaning isn't fragile. It doesn't require belief. It's not borrowed from a book or imposed by a system. It's lived. And lived meaning is the most powerful kind of meaning there is. So ask yourself, if you knew with absolute certainty that there was no reward waiting at the end, no punishment, no legacy, no applause, how would you live? What would you stop doing? What would you start doing? What would become real for you once the illusion falls away? That's not a rhetorical question. That's the beginning of your freedom. The playground of the void. How nihilism can set you free. So what happens when the floor drops out from beneath all your beliefs and you're left standing in the void? That's the moment most people fear. The moment when the scaffolding of religion, culture, tradition, and identity collapses, and all that remains is the naked self. No script, no instructions, just silence. But here's the twist almost no one tells you. That void isn't a prison, it's a playground. When you realize that nothing holds inherent meaning, you're not doomed, you're liberated. You're free from every false obligation you've ever internalized. You no longer need to live life according to someone else's blueprint. You no longer have to chase someone else's idea of success, love, happiness, or morality. The void strips away the noise so you can finally hear your own voice. And the moment you stop needing the universe to give you meaning is the moment you become powerful enough to create it yourself. Think about it. If nothing truly matters by default, then anything can matter by choice. That includes the most mundane, the most absurd, the most personal. For the first time in your life, you can stop asking what you're supposed to want and instead ask what actually makes you feel alive. What makes you curious? What makes your heart race? What makes you forget to check your phone? What would you do if no one ever praised you for it and no one ever saw it? Nihilism doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop pretending. You stop caring about what doesn't matter, and you start fiercely protecting what does, not because it's written in the stars, but because you wrote it yourself. That's real meaning. Not the kind handed to you like a prepackaged meal, but the kind you cook from scratch, even when it's messy, uncertain, and slow. And ironically, that kind of meaning is stronger than the one you were taught to believe in. Let me ask you something deep. If your life were a blank canvas and no one could judge the painting, what would you put on it? Would you still chase the same goals? Would you still believe in the same values? Or would you finally have the courage to make something weird, something ugly, something true? That's the playground. That's the gift nihilism offers: choice, autonomy. The terrifying and exhilarating responsibility to define your own life. And that responsibility is not easy. It's not supposed to be. But the alternative, living in a cage built from borrowed convictions, is much worse. It's the slow death of authenticity. The anesthetized life. The kind of life where you wake up at 50 and wonder whose dreams you've been chasing this whole time. The void, terrifying as it seems, is the only honest starting point, because only from zero can you build something real. When you let go of the idea that you must matter in some cosmic narrative, you create space to choose what matters to you. Maybe it's art, maybe it's love, maybe it's justice, or music, or teaching, or nature. Maybe it's just sitting quietly with someone you care about. That's the beauty. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't need permission. But don't mistake this for emptiness. The void is full of potential. It's the space where you get to become who you truly are, not what the world expects you to be. It's the space where you can finally stop performing and start being. And once you taste that freedom, you'll never want to go back. So the next time you feel the weight of meaninglessness pressing down on you, don't run. Don't numb it. Don't distract yourself with the next goal, the next purchase, the next validation. Sit with it. Listen. Let it strip away everything false. And when the silence settles, ask yourself, what do I want to build here? What do I want to make of this short, strange, beautiful life? Because in that question lies the power to turn the void into a canvas, the silence into a song, and the absurd into art. Dancing with the absurd, finding joy when nothing makes sense once you've stepped into the void and realized it doesn't swallow you whole. Once you've stood in the silence and discovered it's not death, but space, something strange begins to happen. You laugh. Not the kind of laugh that comes from a joke or a punchline, but a laugh that bubbles up from the absurdity of it all. It's the laugh of someone who knows the rules are made up and still chooses to play the game. That right there is the beginning of joy, not the naive, sugar-coated kind, but the kind that's forged in the fire of nothingness. The kind of joy that comes not in spite of the absurd, but because of it. Existence is absurd. That's the truth most people try to either ignore or explain away. We live in a universe that doesn't explain itself, in bodies we didn't choose, with minds that crave meaning in a cosmos that offers none. We love people who die. We build empires that crumble. We chase goals we'll never fully reach. And yet, we wake up, we breathe, we create, we laugh, we dance, we keep going. Why? Because somewhere deep inside we realize that the absurd isn't a curse, it's a canvas. When nothing makes ultimate sense, everything becomes possible. You're no longer bound by cosmic expectations. You're free to invent your own rhythm, your own meaning, your own life. You can dance with the absurd instead of fighting it. And that dance, that defiant, joyful movement in the face of chaos, is what makes us truly human. Albert Camus, the philosopher who stared the absurd straight in the face, once said we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Sisyphus, the mythological figure condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it fall again, forever. Camus said that once Sisyphus accepts the absurdity of his fate, he becomes free. He owns the task. He embraces the struggle. He finds dignity and purpose not in the outcome, but in the effort. And in that moment, he transcends his punishment. He becomes the absurd hero. Now think about your own life. How many boulders have you pushed uphill? How many times have you chased something only to watch it slip away? A relationship, a career, a goal, a sense of certainty. And what did you do next? Did you collapse, or did you pick up the rock and keep going? The absurd doesn't ask us to give up. It asks us to wake up. It asks us to stop looking for perfect answers and start living imperfect lives with courage and creativity. It invites us to laugh at the cosmic joke, not out of despair, but out of recognition. You're in on it now. You see the strings. You see that no one knows what they're doing. And suddenly the pressure lifts. You stop trying to be perfect. You stop trying to impress ghosts. You stop waiting for life to make sense. Instead, you start living. You write poems that no one will read. You love people who might leave. You chase dreams that might fail. And you do it all not because it guarantees a payoff, but because it makes this moment, this fleeting, fragile, ridiculous moment, feel alive. Here's the hard truth. You will die. Everyone you love will die. Everything you build will eventually fade. But that doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it urgent. It makes every word, every touch, every breath matter more. Not because it will last forever, but because it won't. So when the absurd knocks on your door, don't hide. Invite it in. Offer it tea. Laugh with it. Dance with it. Show it that you're not afraid to love in a world that breaks hearts, to create in a world that forgets, to hope in a world that never promises anything. That's not weakness. That's strength. That's defiance. That's joy. So let me ask you, if life doesn't have to make sense to be beautiful, what would you stop waiting for? What would you stop holding back? What would you do if you knew the absurd was watching and smiling, meaning as a revolt? How choosing to care changes everything at the edge of the absurd, when all illusions of cosmic order have been stripped away and you're left to face the raw silence of existence. Something profound still remains, the power to choose. You can choose to collapse, to numb yourself, to drift through life as a ghost in your own story. Or, and this is the harder, braver path, you can choose to care. Not because the universe demands it, not because there's a reward waiting, but because that choice, that act of caring in a world that offers no guarantees, is the ultimate human rebellion. It's how we revolt against meaninglessness, not by denying it, but by defying it. That's where real meaning begins. Unlike inherited meaning, the kind passed down by religion, culture, or tradition, chosen meaning is forged in the fire of uncertainty. It's not something you're given, it's something you create through action, attention, and love. When you choose to care, you're not pretending the absurd doesn't exist. You're looking it dead in the eye and saying, yes, I see you, and I will still love. I will still build. I will still hope. That is not delusion, that is rebellion. And there is nothing more powerful than a conscious human being who chooses to care in a world that doesn't require it. This is what Camus meant when he said, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." It's not about winning. It's not about solving life like a puzzle. It's about the sheer audacity of showing up every day with your eyes open, your heart exposed, and your spirit intact. That's what it means to revolt. Not with violence, but with vitality. Not with anger, but with awareness. So what does this look like in practice? It looks like choosing kindness even when it's not reciprocated. It looks like creating art that no one may ever see. It looks like standing up for what you believe in, even when the world shrugs. It looks like being present with someone in pain, even when you have no answers. It looks like savoring small things, a breeze, a song, a moment of silence, not because they're part of some divine plan, but because they're here, and so are you. When you choose to care, you reclaim your agency. You stop being a passive consumer of life and start becoming an author of it. You write your story, even if it's short, messy, even if no one reads it. Because meaning isn't a destination, it's a verb. It's something you do, not something you find. And every time you act with intention, every time you choose compassion over cynicism, creation over consumption, courage over comfort, you're carving meaning into the fabric of your days. And guess what? That meaning is real, not because it floats above the universe, but because it connects you to it. When you care, you feel. When you feel, you live. And when you live fully, honestly, vulnerably, you become the kind of person who doesn't need the universe to explain itself. You're too busy dancing in it. So here's the final question. If nothing truly matters by default, and you have the power to choose what does, then what are you waiting for? What could be more urgent than that? You don't need a perfect reason to begin. You don't need a divine script to follow. You just need to wake up and care. Care deeply. Care relentlessly. Care even when it hurts, even when it's inconvenient, even when it doesn't make sense. Because in that act of caring, you become the meaning you were looking for all along. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.